Our special guest today is Dr. Beth Kurland. Beth is a clinical psychologist with 3 decades of experience. She's also a TEDx Talks speaker, as well as a sought-after public speaker. Dr. Kurland is a mind-body coach and the author of 3 award-winning books: Dancing on the Tightrope, Transcending the Habits of Your Mind and Awakening to Your Fullest Life, The Transformative Power of 10 Minutes, an 8-week guide to reducing stress and cultivating well-being, and Gifts of the Rain Puddle, poems, meditations, and reflections for the mindful soul. Her latest book is You Don't Have to Change Everything: 6 Ways to Shift Your Vantage Point, Stop Striving for Happy, and Find True Well-Being. Beth blogs for Psychology Today and is the creator of the Wellbeing Toolkit online program, and she lives in the Boston area. Dr. Beth Kurland, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for your time. I know how busy you are. Beth, there's so much to talk about with you today, but let's make sure we keep your publicist happy by talking first about your latest book. You don't have to change everything: 6 Ways to Shift Your Vantage Point, Stop Striving for Happy, and Find True Well-Being, which was published earlier this year. A key premise of the book is that it's not about trying to change yourself. It's about meeting yourself where you are. How does someone do that?
So I think about that in a couple of different ways. I think it starts with awareness. Right? A lot of times we go through our lives, our day, we're on autopilot. And so we need to start noticing, what's happening here, and especially a lot of my book, a lot of what I'm referring to is really our inner states, right? What's happening under the hood, what's happening inside here. So a lot of times we're either just ignoring it, we're not in tune with it, we may be pushing away what's going on. And when we meet ourselves where we are, we bring awareness to what's happening. So it's kind of like, I think about it like shining a flashlight in a dark room. If you're in a pitch black room, you're trying to get from point A to point B, and there's obstacles, you'd be tripping and stumbling. If you turn on a flashlight, the room's illuminated and the obstacles don't go away, but you can see more clearly what's there. And it's then kind of a holding a space, allowing and accepting and acknowledging whatever is happening as a starting point. Because I don't think we're often taught how to do that, or we're biologically wired to often, do otherwise, or we get caught up in this automatic pilot. So it's really about meeting and greeting what's here as a starting point, and from there seeing what's needed, what's helpful, how can I be present. I think about it like if you've ever been in the presence of just a really good friend who will just sit and listen and hold a space for wherever you're at. In that kind of presence, there's a way in which just whatever's there has a space to show up. So I guess that's, yeah.
Nope, that's a great place to start. Now, let's focus on that important word, change. Would you elaborate on why we don't have to, quote, change to change everything? And how does change come about if we're not changing ourselves?
Yeah, so I had fun with the title a little bit, and really thinking about this idea of change that most people think about change. And I think especially in the self-help world, there's often can be a sense of, I need to fix myself. I need, there's something wrong and it needs to be fixed. I need to change myself. I need to change how I'm feeling in order to be okay. I need to change my circumstances, and there's certainly nothing wrong and can be helpful doing that. But sometimes we can't, always change that. So the focus of this book is really about how do we change our relationship to what's happening inside of us. So it's not about I need to fix and change what's arising, but I can change where I'm standing, where I'm looking from. So for example, me being caught, let's say, in a moment of stress and overwhelm, if I'm kind of swallowed up in that moment, I'm activated, I'm triggered, I'm, just kind of overtaken. Yeah, it happens to all of us. But if I shift where I'm looking from, and now I become aware of Beth, who is struggling with this difficult moment, and I'm able to kind of have this mindful view of stepping outside of it enough to see what's happening. That shifts the vantage point, that shifts the lens, and it allows for a lot of different inner resources that are already here that we can then begin to tap into. So I think about this idea we don't have to change everything, that we have these amazing inner resources, but we don't always know how to access them. And when we can shift our vantage point, shift where we're looking from, shift our perspective, we're not changing, ourselves. We're not even changing our external circumstances, but things begin to change from there. And happy to kind of dive deeper into that, but just to kind of a little overview.
And we will, and that's a great place to start. I appreciate that. You believe that we don't typically listen to our inner experiences. First, what are inner experiences? And second, what is it about inner experiences that causes us not to open up?
Yeah. So, when I'm talking about inner experiences, I'm really talking about, what we would call our emotions, physical sensations that we experience in our body. So it might also be, a tension, a tightness, sometimes anxiety can be expressed as heart beating faster. So it might have more of a physiological expression to it. But, just this inner, what I would say, especially with some of the more difficult emotions, inner turbulence that we all feel in the midst of the ups and downs of our day. And so, here's the thing, that we're biologically wired, and many of us, myself certainly, socially and culturally conditioned as well, to push away what's unpleasant and to seek what's pleasant. And that was a really adaptive strategy for our Stone Age ancestors, helped with survival. And yet in our modern lives, what we are often wired to do is push away those internal experiences that are unpleasant. And so in doing so, we can actually cut ourselves off from a great source of information, and also from parts of ourselves that may want to be seen and heard and acknowledged in order to move through whatever is happening, in that moment in our life.
In your experience, what happens to us when we stuff down those unpleasant emotions rather than dealing with them head on?
Yeah, so I think about it a little bit like putting a lid on a pot of boiling water. Sometimes, that eventually, if that water is boiling long enough, it begins to spill over, begins to kind of leak over the sides and that kind of thing. And, most of the research that I've come across shows that in the long term, there are times and places, I will say for sure, that it may be appropriate or even necessary to put away our emotions to deal immediately with some threat at hand or that kind of thing. But in the long term, when we suppress or avoid or push away some of these inner experiences, first of all, it takes a lot of energy to do that. Imagine standing at the door and holding pressing the door so that this, unpleasant visitor can't come through. That can become exhausting after a while. We can exhaust our resources. And in the long term, again, the research shows us that for our psychological well-being, being able to find some middle ground where we're not overtaken by these emotions, right? We don't want to be flooded. We don't want to be, so overwhelmed that we can't deal with them. But on the other hand, the other extreme of pushing away, avoiding, suppressing, that kind of thing doesn't tend to work so well in the long term. So where is there a middle ground in which we can meet and greet and, meet ourselves where we are and work from there?
I was just taking some notes. We were talking there and you kind of touched on a few different things that I was writing down. You talked about how it takes energy and it's exhausting to meet these challenges head on. Why is it so hard for us to talk about some of our problems or admit that we might need help? Is it because we don't want to seem weak? Is it because it takes so much energy? Stigma, I know, is a big word. What is it? All of the above?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have so many people who have come into my office over the years, and I've been sitting with patients now for over 30 years. And And so many people will come in feeling like there's something wrong with me that I'm feeling this way. And they might have experienced like a really significant loss and even, start crying or something and they say, oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't, I should be stronger. Or so I think we get these messages from lots of different places about how we need to be or what we should or shouldn't feel. And so that can, I get show up in terms of just feeling like I should be able to deal with this on my own. I should be stronger. I shouldn't need help, and that kind of thing. And what I've seen, I feel like I have such a privilege from my seat, over these 30 years of just seeing like we're all the common humanity that we all experience, um, and how essential it is to just have those connections and to be able to seek help in whatever form that takes. Of course, I'm biased in terms of therapy and how helpful it's been for myself, certainly through the years, and I see for my patients. But I think help can come in lots of different forms, um, and and just being able to recognize that we're human, and yeah, these struggles are probably more common than most people realize. Whatever they may be going through, they're not alone.
I do a lot of work in the veteran and first responder mental health space. And right before COVID, I'd really seen a shift globally in the mental health sort of status of everybody, of the world. And then obviously COVID hit. And we'll talk a little bit about it later. But I've been waiting for, and we're seeing it now, that what I'm calling the tsunami effect of the mental health crisis post-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one good thing that I've been saying over the last year or so since the pandemic ended is that the one positive thing that happened throughout COVID is that it put a big spotlight on mental health. And it's okay to not be okay. We hear that all the time. I reference Jim Irsay, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm dying to get him on the show. But he created a campaign called Kicking the Stigma and is really out there publicly doing his works with one of their star linebackers. But you're seeing a lot more athletes. You're seeing more movie stars coming forward on this. Do you think that will help with a cultural shift in terms of saying, there's something wrong with me, I don't want to talk about it, I'm just going to bottle it up, versus if Michael Phelps can be out there talking about committing suicide, or Smiles, or anyone else? We've seen a few golfers lately. A golfer about a month ago or a few months ago committed suicide. Do you think by having people like that out there, it's going to change that narrative for us?
Absolutely. I think that can be really helpful for people, especially to, look out at people who are well known in some capacity, or maybe, if, yeah, I know somebody who I admire out there and they're sharing their story and they're being authentic. And, people sharing about, yeah, things like depression and anxiety are, a lot of people struggle with it. And I think there is so much shame and there can be so much stigma around that. But yeah, if I can hear stories of other people out there that are in the pop culture or in, the whatever different realms, and hear other people going through something like that, then there's a sense of, okay, I'm not alone, and other people are going through this too. And I think it really can help to decrease that stigma for sure. And recognize, yep, this is just part of our human experience. And again, going back to what you say, yeah, and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to talk about these things. It's important to do so. It's important for our healing.
And one thing I've learned in some of the research I did in the first responder space, which I think can transfer over to the general population, if you will, I always thought there was one specific traumatic event that would affect a first responder. They pulled a dead body of a car. They found a dead child, something like that, that would certainly affect anybody. But the consensus was it was 25 or 30 years of traumatic event after traumatic event after event. Do you think that transfers over to, I'll call it mainstream population? I know that their job is significantly different than most of ours, but is it more common to have a series or at least more than one traumatic event to weigh on somebody?
Yeah, I think, again, from sitting with people for so many years, and I guess maybe I have sampling bias, perhaps in some respect, but I think that, um, most of the people who come through my door are pretty representative of, the general population. And I think that this idea of, I think of it as like big T trauma and little T trauma. And that even when we don't experience maybe some of those more big T traumas and traumatic events, most of us have experienced a lot of little T traumas. The things, being bullied in third grade, or having, a parent maybe who yells and screams in the house, well-meaning, but not knowing how else to, manage a situation, or, whatever those kinds of events that we just, as human beings, that we experience. So I think that there can, yeah, and those things can accumulate, and they affect how we see the world, and how our nervous system responds to things, and these beliefs that get kind of go under the surface of our awareness. So we begin to operate going through the world with certain beliefs about ourselves, about, the world, about, how we see ourselves. And those beliefs often can be distorted. They can be inaccurate. They can be based on really early information. We did the best we could at age 6 or 4 or 7, to make sense of the world. But then we carry those beliefs around with us, not realizing that at age 20 or 30 or 50, they don't really fit us anymore. They're not so accurate. And yet, we may not be aware that those are still guiding our behaviors.
Big T trauma versus little T trauma. I've never heard that before, and I hope you don't mind if I use that going forward, because it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So you write about 6 vantage points. Would you share them with us, and why each are so important?
Sure. And you tell me how much detail you want me to. I could probably talk an hour about each one.
You got 40 minutes. Go for it.
Try to, just dip our toe into each one. So I guess what I would say as a starting point is that I believe, and this is not, my belief, is just coming from the research and my reading and studying over the years, but that well-being is an innate capacity that we all have, but it can be hard to access sometimes, especially, in the ups and downs of our life. And it's not something that we typically learn how to access, how to strengthen. I also heard Richard Davidson, who's one of my favorite neuroscientists, and he does some wonderful research, but talks about this idea. He said at one point, and I may be quoting or paraphrasing, well-being is fundamentally no different than learning to play the cello. So, this idea that it's also a skill that can be cultivated. And so each of these shifts of vantage point, as I think about it, gives us a portal into this deep well of well-being that is there for each of us. But again, maybe we don't quite know how to really open that door, if you will. So, and each of these vantage points also gives us a way to work with some of this inner turbulence, if you will, the ups and downs of our day-to-day lives that we experience. And most of us we're taught all manner of things in school. We're taught, whatever, I won't name every, right? But just thinking about even what we're taught in our homes, in our schools, in our workplaces. And I would say most of the time we're not taught what to do when we come up against these inner energies that are more unpleasant. And so we maybe tend to flounder. We tend to resort to the biological pushing away or avoiding or suppressing or getting overwhelmed by. So each of these vantage points is a way of really working with that. What do we do with that? So all that being said, a little background. The first vantage point that I talk about is the anchor view. And the anchor view really has to do with, I'll give you a little metaphor, but if you imagine that you're swimming in the ocean and a big storm whips up, and you try to fight against that storm, you might exhaust your resources. If you let that storm sweep you away, that's probably not going to be so great either. But if you imagine that there's an anchor, a boat that's anchored nearby, and you could grab onto or swim over to that boat, grab the rope that's anchored deep to the ocean floor. And now there's a sense of stability. There's a sense of safety. Even in the middle of this storm, from that vantage point, you're no longer caught in the storm being swept away. You kind of have this safe anchor to hold, and you may not be able to stop the storm, but you can watch it pass by, and there's more ease there. And so the anchor view is really all about how do we grab that metaphorical anchor and really help our autonomic nervous system to feel more safe in the midst of, some of these difficult emotions that we experience. And I guess, again, I'm just trying to think about a quick way to have this make sense for people. But essentially, we have survival, what I think of as survival wiring and thriving wiring. We have these old survival pathways that are very present in our biology that people will be familiar with as kind of that classic fight, flight, or freeze response or stress response. So when we come up against threats, quote, threats in our environment, no longer the saber-toothed tiger for the most part, but, it might be the traffic jams or too much to do or getting the kids off to school or work deadlines or financial stress or whatever that is. Our body can go into kind of a protective mode that was adaptive and reflexive. And we, in essence, the body's getting ready to fight or to flee. Sometimes we go into more of that freeze or shut down response when we face these challenges in our day. And that's, again, this is a natural adaptive response that we all experience. But a lot of us can get stuck there without realizing it. We can get stuck in let's say, these stress responses, and that can show up as anxiety and worry, and sometimes more of the depressive moods or irritability or anger, these kinds of things. And the anchor view is all about helping to really to shift physiologically what's happening in our body, to bring more cues of safety, to work with mind-body practices that can help us activate different networks, different circuits in our body and brain and nervous system, that when we can bring in a little bit more balanced energy, we have access to creativity, we have access to seeing a bigger perspective, we have access to problem solving, we have access to all these things that we're not able to access when we're in that fight or flight mode. So the anchor view is really learning how to work with our biology and understanding that, and again, using some of these mind-body practices that can help us to find the calm in the middle of the storm.
Perfect
and
analogy.
I guess I'll stop there and see if
great analogy, and it's just a teaser to get folks to buy your book. And that being said, where can people find your most recent book?
They can find it on my website, bethkurland.com. They can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of the major outlets where books are sold.
Perfect. And, we're talking about 6 vantage points. Do you have a favorite vantage point or one that you find that's most powerful?
It's hard to pick. I guess
you love all your children equally?
Yeah. But I would say, I'll share this one with you. The one that I have found most transformative in my own life and with my patients, I think, is the one that I call the compassionate parent view. And so this vantage point is all about what do we do, when we come up against, again, some of these more unpleasant emotional experiences in our day-to-day lives. And a lot of times, if you think about, I use this analogy of a parent could respond to, let's say, a child's in distress. A child is upset, something they really wanted to do didn't work out, they got canceled, and so they're feeling really sad, they're feeling down. And the parent could respond in one of 3 ways. They might ignore that child completely and just let the child kind of flounder on their own. They might say to that child, hey, snap out of it. Cut it out, stop whining, just like move on, wipe off that, wipe away those tears. Let's just, see that smile. Or they could maybe sit next to the child, put their arm around the child and say, I can understand how disappointed you are. That it was something you were really looking forward to, and I see how upset you are, and I'm here with you. And how can we, move forward through this? And I think most of us would probably say, I would like that third parent response if I was upset. But when it comes to ourselves, we often treat ourselves like that first or second parent. We kind of dismiss our own emotions, tell ourselves to, hey, just put it away or cut it out or stop whining or whatever that is. And we don't often learn how to meet our own inner distress with that kind of compassionate response. So the compassionate parent view is all about how we can really be with our own whatever anger or sadness or irritability or whatnot, in a way that there's a kind of alchemy, I think, that happens when we are able to do that, when we're able to meet our distress in this kind of a way that really, and again, I think going back to the something I said at the beginning, if you think about it, maybe a time when you were really upset about something and you sat with a good friend, and maybe just said, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened. I had this terrible day and da, da, da. And if you really feel supported and heard and seen, that friend doesn't maybe need to even say much, but you just get that feeling like, hey, I'm here with you. And in that, there's like some ease that washes over. There's a sense like, I can move on. I can handle this. Okay, I can see more clearly, how I want to move forward. When we learn how to do that for ourselves, that's where the transformation, I think, really comes in. And so that's can be so powerful.
Well, I think to that point, what are your thoughts on just actually just saying it to somebody, a close friend, a confidant, whatever, maybe like, this is bothering me, I just got to get it off my chest. Is that sort of a step one to sort of opening up for deeper conversations or deeper discussions on the harder topics?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably not enough people do that, in the sense, again, going back to what you said, feeling like I gotta hold this in, or I shouldn't ask for help, or that kind of thing. So I think there can be some immense support in being able to start there, or to share, to have a trusted person who you can just talk and are not going to feel judged, and not somebody who's necessarily going to jump in and try to fix it for you, but just hold the space and really listen, and that can be a starting point. And then again, learning how to do that for ourselves can really help to create this kind of emotional alchemy. I guess I think of it as, in a way that just makes things easier to bear.
You write about survival wiring, which I think you referenced earlier about being in the ocean during a storm, versus thriving wiring. Would you take a deep dive into the difference and why it's important to recognize between the two?
Yeah. So again, I find this so helpful for myself. And I share this a lot, but I would say I'm wired kind of more on the type A, anxious by nature and temperament and so forth. So I'm a good case study for myself, like really working with this over my lifetime. And I share that I feel like I'm an expert on stress because I'm so good at feeling it myself. And so to understand that there is this biological adaptive wiring that we have, that is really trying to protect us. It's trying to protect us from a saber-toothed tiger. Our brain doesn't really recognize the difference between what it's doing biologically, revving up the heart, revving up the blood pressure, getting us to, get all activated and whatnot, to deal with a threat, being stuck in traffic late for an important meeting, versus that saber-toothed tiger coming at us. And so when we can begin with an understanding of that a little bit, and okay, that's my survival wiring trying to protect me, either by giving me resources to fight, to flee, or to freeze. Those are all adaptive, protective responses. They're not bad. They just might be not the resources that I most need to actually meet the modern day challenge at hand. And so when I can then understand that, oh, there's also this social engagement system, it's sometimes referred to. And we have the, I guess, without getting too much, but anybody who's a little interested in the science, this whole ventral vagal pathway, this vagus nerve has different branches. And this ventral pathway or vagus nerve has connections to our heart. It has connections to, lots of muscles in our face and our ears and all this stuff. And that helps to bring a balance into our nervous system, so that when we're starting to experience stress, if we have ways of accessing and bringing more balance into the autonomic nervous system, it allows us to then access, step out of that primitive circuitry and begin to access our higher cortex, our thinking brain. We can problem solve better. We have access to bigger perspective on things. And when you're not being chased by a tiger, it makes sense that you would be able to explore, right? And you would be able to invent and be creative and be affiliative and seek out support from the tribe. And these were also important survival strategies that helped our ancestors. And when we can understand that and learn how to, and I'll give you an example, like during the pandemic, the early stages, for me, for many of us, I think, but I was really aware of myself being often in the state of, fight, flight, freeze, a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And when I could just recognize that, kind of meet myself where I'm at, maybe I'm waking up in the middle of the night and it's like, okay, this heart's going and all this thoughts going through my head, and just reckon, oh, this is my survival wiring trying to protect me. And yet these resources, all of this activation isn't actually helping keep me safer right now. But there are other things that I can do. I can put my hand on my heart. I can begin to slow down my exhalations. I can begin to use imagery to call up a sense of connection and support of the people in my life. I can, bring myself to the awareness in this moment. I'm in the safety of my bedroom and I can feel the mattress underneath me. These things then bring balance into my nervous system, and I'm then better equipped to maybe say, okay, how can I go forward from here? Begin to gain access to these other resources. So long answer. I could keep talking about that, but I hope that's a little bit helpful.
No, it is. And something completely off topic, but I have to ask, there are a lot of ferocious beasts out there that I'd think of. You've referenced saber-toothed tiger about 4 or 5 times. I'm just curious what the connection is with that. That's just something I wouldn't think about. It's just like the most fierce animal you can think of.
So I guess it's just what I've heard talked about, in my own studies of just understanding the evolutionary value of these mechanisms that we still live by, that are still very much wired into our biology. And so that a lot of these things really evolved during, that period of time when our ancestors were faced with that external physical threat of the saber-toothed tiger. And so all of these responses really helped our species survive. And again, the challenge, and we still need, and I think that wiring serves an important place, but it can sometimes still take over at times in our modern lives when there may be other resources that could be even more effective for helping us meet our challenges. So
helpful. Yeah. No, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like to call a show first. We've never had a saber-toothed tiger reference before, so it's our first time. So I was just curious about that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So Beth, a few moments ago, you referenced yourself as being a case study. Mm-hmm. I understand that your own healing journey played a part in your desire to write this book. Would you share that story with us?
Yeah, so I guess I would say, kind of going back to when I was in high school, my mom died in a car accident when I was 15. And so, that was pretty significant trauma for my family. And I think, that experience certainly shaped me in so many ways, as trauma does for, like anybody who's lived through that. Um, and so there was a lot of my own healing journey. And I think that journey would have been there anyway, maybe in some similar ways, but certainly for me, there was this sense of, how to process all this enormous grief. And interesting for me, it was really, I would say, most profoundly when I had my own kids, when I became a mother, that I really did my deepest healing work around that. Because I think there were ways that I kind of pushed it away and held it at bay and moved on. And, I know at the time, like as I recall, I never missed a day of school. I got straight A's. I just kind of mustered on. And there were many ways that may have been adaptive at that time. But for me, like really learning how to be with and be present to that grief and some of these other feelings that I was trying to avoid was definitely a big piece of, my own personal healing journey.
One of your books, Gifts of the Rain Puddle, Poems, Meditations, and Reflections for the Mindful Soul, is obviously a book of poems, reflections, and meditations. Was that sort of writing mainly a hobby for you? Is it therapeutic or both?
Yeah, so I would say I remember I think I wrote my first poem when I was 6 years old. Um, and interestingly, yeah, it was when we were making a big move at that time, and I was feeling sad about leaving my friend and that kind of thing. And so poetry became for me at a really early age, I think, a way to express these emotions that I hadn't, maybe otherwise I didn't have words for. But somehow through my writing, that was just a vehicle for me to do that. And then over the years, I really found that writing poetry allowed me to just be present with these deep emotions within me, whether more of the awe, of life, and also the grief and the struggles and the, challenges. And being able to, and so in some ways looking back, I think that my writing poetry is kind of like a mindfulness meditation in action in some ways. Um, and actually for the first younger part of my life, I really thought I was going to be a writer as a profession because I was just drawn to that. And then I kind of came across the path of psychology and went that route. But it's been really fun as it's, my later years here, my adult years, to be able to circle back to that writing and connect to it in different ways. And, even in this new book, there's not poetry, but there's a lot of personal vignettes and a little bit more poetic writing, I would say, at times, and sharing some of my personal story that, yeah, has been just a fun expression for me and helpful for my own therapeutic, yeah, growth.
No, thank you for sharing that. You're a mind body coach, and I know it's going to be a new term and concept to some folks in our audience. So let's delve into how psychological principles integrate with our physical health and wellness practices. Would you start by explaining what mind body coaching involves?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it may be different for each person to some degree, but for me, it's like I am so passionate about, because of my own experiences in working with mind body practices and being able to teach them to other people over the years, that and I just see how valuable they are and in terms of transformation and well-being and all of that. So it's really about being able to teach people these tools so that they can use it in their own lives to access their inner resources and to tap into this well of well-being and to really be able to live their fullest life. And I get a lot of excitement in, being able to do that and really, and seeing, mostly because of just seeing the effect and how helpful it is for others when they can access these different modalities.
And what are the key benefits of mind-body coaching for mental and physical health?
What are the key benefits of mind-body practices? Um, wow. I think so many things. There's a lot of interesting research, and I've just been listening even this week to like new things coming out about the power of the mind and body in terms of our physical health. It's quite remarkable. That a lot of physical conditions have, let's say, there may be a stress-based component or that stress can exacerbate. So what happens is when our body is in a state of stress, right, we are preparing to deal with that threat of, again, quote, that metaphorical saber-toothed tiger. And so resources are getting allocated towards preparing our bodies to fight or to flee or to freeze, to shut down. When we're in a more balanced state, our body is in a very different state where the focus is on growth, restoration, and healing. And so again, when we're not, when our nervous system is feeling more grounded in safety, our bodies can heal. It can focus on cell growth, all these things, immune functioning, and so forth. So just from a physical perspective, it's really quite fascinating that when we can teach people how to help bring more balance into their bodies and to work with that stress response and have ways of calming and shifting and so forth, being able to tap into more what I call heartfelt emotions. There's some very profound physical and physiological changes that can happen that can affect our physical health. But I think equally in terms of our mental health and well-being as well. And again, I think about this when we can tap into what I call this newer operating system that the thriving circuits. It's kind of like opening up. I think about like opening up a treasure chest, unlocking a treasure chest, and in that treasure chest, there's care, compassion, creativity, perspective, self-compassion, all of these different kinds of equanimity and calm and clarity and whatever, all these things that become accessible to us. And that those things are profoundly supportive for our mental health and for our well-being. And so those mind-body practices kind of give the key to open up this treasure chest. It's one way of thinking about it.
Well, I guess part two is, how do you integrate mind-body coaching with more traditional therapeutic approaches?
Yeah, so everybody may have a different take on this, but as a therapist, I can certainly say that not in all cases, but where it's appropriate, a lot of my patients, I will integrate or bring in some kinds of mind-body practices to help with whatever situations we're addressing. And I've really seen some profound healing that can happen, even going back to what I was talking about, that compassionate parent view. But there are different mind-body practices of teaching people how to, be compassionate towards themselves when they're experiencing inner distress. And we can work with that in through meditation or through imagery or visualization. And it can be immensely powerful in terms of really helping people shift to their vantage points, shift the way that they're relating to their inner experiences. Teaching people, a lot of people who come to therapy have stress of various kinds. And so having tools to really be able to know what to do to work with stress or anxiety and And even trauma, so much of the research with trauma, and then some of the work of Bessel van der Kolk and others shows that the body is a huge piece of the healing, that we can't heal trauma just from the head alone and just from talking. I mean, the talking therapy can be really helpful, but when we also incorporate the body, then I think that's where profound healing really happens.
Beth, you said that when you first studied psychology, there's a big focus on, quote, identifying what was wrong with people and trying to fix this. Isn't that what patients expect? That there's something wrong with me, something wrong in my life, and I need you to help me fix it so I can have a better life and better relationships?
I think that may be true for a lot of people who come in the door. And in my book, I really tried to like flip around this whole fix it kind of, um, you know, approach. So I was very fortunate in the year after graduate school. So when I did my internship, I worked with Dr. Robert Brooks, who was at that time in charge of the uh, a program at McLean Hospital working with children. And so I studied with him for a year. And one of the things that Bob taught me that I share in the book is this idea that change comes about not by finding what's wrong and fixing it, but by finding what's right and strengthening it. And I feel like that's such a profound kind of shift in the way that we look at things. And he was working at that time with children with some pretty significant behavioral issues. And what he found is that rather than going in and trying to say, okay, here's the problem with this kid and we gotta go in and fix, he would find and help the teachers and others and parents find the child's islands of competence, as he called it, the things that they're doing well, the strengths that they have, and build upon that and really strengthen that. And that approach made such a huge difference in these kids' behavior. And so I really took this model with me and through all these years. And so this actually became one of the vantage points that I talk about, the mirror view in the book. And often when we look in the real mirror or the metaphorical mirror, we see what's wrong, what's missing, what we don't like. We have this negativity bias of our brain as human beings to focus on the mistakes we make, that the things that we feel like we do wrong, or the things we feel are broken or that we need to fix. And oftentimes we can overlook our strengths. We can overlook the things we're already doing well that are supporting us. We can overlook these inner qualities that we have that are maybe there, but we're not paying attention because our brain is narrowing in on that thing we did wrong and not the 10 things we did well during the day. And so that mirror view is really all about being able to look in the mirror and have it reflect back the strengths, the positive qualities we have, our islands of confidence, as Bob would call it, these sorts of things and I think that's where profound change can really come from. And I think of my role as a therapist in some way as holding up a mirror for people and really helping them see their strengths. Somebody might come in having experienced trauma and feel, kind of the sense of, broken in some way, or there's something wrong with me, or I need to fix it. And I try to hold up a mirror and say, look at all the ways that you've been incredibly resilient in your life. And how do we then build on this and help you strengthen this, to move forward.
You said something very interesting to me a moment ago. You did one bad thing today, and you're not focused on the 10 great things you did.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we do that? Are we just wired that way? Is it just we have to be perfect all the time? What is that?
Yeah, I think it's our evolutionary wiring. And again, it kind of made sense for our Stone Age ancestors to be focused on the negatives, where the problems were lurking. I need to remember where that tiger is lurking behind what grass over where, and that was more important than remembering, even like Rick Hansen, one of my favorite neuropsychologists, talks about remembering where those carrots might be found, because if I mess up on and forget where that tiger is, no more carrots forever, right? So that became more important for our ancestors, to be able to notice, anticipate the problems, anticipate, what could go wrong. Um, Again, smelling the roses might be lovely, but that wasn't going to help our ancestors survive. So our brains are still, we carry a lot of this old wiring with us. And the more we can shine the light on that and understand that, we can really work with it.
We briefly touched on COVID and mental health earlier on the show. The World Health Organization declared an end to the pandemic phase of COVID-19 on May 5th, 2023. That's been almost 18 months ago, but there's been a prevailing thought that the mental health impact of the pandemic would last for much longer. How has or did the COVID-19 pandemic affect your practice?
Well, I guess, one thing that strikes me so much is I feel like access to mental health in some ways is, in a positive way, that the telehealth, right, virtual visit that have become so commonplace during the pandemic has made mental health more accessible. But at the same time, what I've seen such a challenge with is that there's not enough mental health providers at this point. For that, I've had so many people reach out and say, I've been trying for 6 months to find somebody. And so I think the increase in mental health issues, or maybe just awareness of that, has made it, or the shortage of, I'm not sure exactly there, but I think, that becomes a challenge. And I think that what I've seen too is just this developmentally, wherever people were at during the pandemic, you take kids, whatever point in their development, were they graduating high school? Were they in the midst of college? Were they, in the middle of a transition or whatnot? And some of that, I feel like, kind of got a little bit frozen in time, or stunted in some ways. It's just challenges that kids are still working through, adults as well.
No, agree. We went through that. My middle daughter just graduated high school last week, and has the first year and a half of COVID was it. So it's just a big transition time. So I'm waiting for a Harvard Business School case study or some psychological review on all that to come out, but the jury's still out. Beth, we've just got about 2 minutes left. How would someone get in touch with you if they wanted you to speak to a group? And again, how can they find You Don't Have to Change Everything and your other books?
Yeah, so my website is a good place to sort of access a lot of different things, including a bunch of free resources that I have on there. And there's a contact form as well. I love to hear from people. So, and that is my name, Beth Kurland, BethKurland.com. And my books are all on there with links as well, but people can also go on to Amazon, or again, whatever your favorite, bookstore online, and order it. I also have an audiobook actually that came out recently as well, for those who like to listen as opposed to read.
Just in time for the drive to the beach.
Yeah.
Dr. Beth Kurland, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be here.
You. I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.